Hello. Welcome to another episode of The Amateur Cat. I'm Brooke, and this is my channel about all things writing. So today, I'm going to read you a story. A Brothers Grimm. An old school story, a fairy tale. It's called Death's Messengers, and I think it's got a juicy twist. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to read the story, and then we're going to figure out which Save the Cat genre it is. And if you don't know which Save the Cat genres, what we'll do is we'll pick two, and we'll talk about those genres, and we'll figure out which one this one is about. So probably a cool thing to share is some Brothers Grimm famous stories. Let me quick share a few of those. Hansel and Gretel, Rumpelstiltskin, The Pied Piper, Death's Messenger, The Frog Prince, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and let me see, I think there's one, Rapunzel, and The Elves of the Shoemaker. I'm not familiar with that one, but okay. So are we ready for Death's Messenger? Let's do it. Okay. In ancient times, a giant was wandering along the highway when suddenly a stranger jumped toward him and shouted, "Stop! Not one step further." "What?" said the giant. "You, a creature that I could crush between my fingers. You want to block my way? Who are you that you dare to speak so boldly?" "I am Death," answered the other one. "No one resists me, and you too must obey my orders." But the giant refused and began to wrestle with Death. It was a long, violent battle, and finally the giant got the upper hand and knocked Death down with his fist, causing him to collapse by a stone. And the giant went on his way, and Death lay there, conquered, so weak that he could not get up again. "So what is to come of this?" he said. "If I stay lying here in a corner, no one will die in the world, and it will become so filled with people that they won't have room to stand beside one another." Meanwhile, a young man came down the road, vigorous and healthy. He was singing a song and looking this way and that. Seeing the half-conscious individual, he approached him with compassion, raised him up, gave him a refreshing drink from his flask, and waited until he regained his strength. "Do you know," asked the stranger, as he stood up, "who I am, and who you have helped onto his legs again?" "No," answered the youth, "I do not know you." "I am Death," he said. "I spare no one, nor can make an exception for you. However, you may see that I am grateful. I promise you that I will not attack you without warning, but instead will send my messengers to you before I come to take you away." "Good," said the youth. "It is to my benefit that I shall know when you are coming, and that I will be safe from you until then." Then he went on his way, and he was cheerful and carefree, and lived one day at a time. However, the youth and good health did not last long. Soon came sickness and pain, which tormented him by day and deprived him of his rest by night. "I shall not die," he said to himself, "for Death will first send his messengers. But I do wish that these wicked days of sickness were over." Regaining his health, he began once more to live cheerfully. Then one day someone tapped on his shoulder. He looked around, and Death was standing beside him, who said, "Follow me. The hour of your departure from this world has come." "What?" replied the man. "Are you breaking your word? Did you not promise that you would send your messengers to me before you yourself would come? I have not seen one of them." "Be still," answered Death. "Have I not sent you one messenger after another? Did not fever come and strike you, and shake you, and throw you down? Has not dizziness numbed your head? Has not gout pinched your limbs? Did your ears not buzz? Did toothache not bite into your cheeks? Did your eyes not darken? And furthermore, has not my brother's sleep reminded you every night of me? During the night did you not lie there as if you were already dead? The man did not know how to answer, so he surrendered to his fate and went away with death. Okay. It's an interesting one. How do we decide what and who is the main character and what is the genre? So I'm going to do a little more thought. I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you my assessment. And then we'll see if I'm right. Good morning. Yes, it is a fresh new day. So last night I read Death's Messenger by the Brothers Grimm. What a cool story. Thanks for that treat, Brothers Grimm. Gosh, let me see, 1840, that's a long time ago, and still today, what a great story. What a testament to the power of story and how it absolutely will outlive us all, right? So let's tell some great stories. Now, last night I got into this book, and I did my homework, right? At least this is my process. Whenever I'm trying to figure out which genre it is, I like to go right back to the original text and save the cat and just see if the different elements of the story measure up to the essential ingredients of the genre. And last night I looked at 4. So I'm gonna tell you which one I thought it was, and then I said, I'm not sure, and I slept on it, and this morning I finally felt like I think I've got the answer. I know which genre it is, and I'm going to share that with you. Okay, you ready? Genres. So the 4 Save the Cat genres that I researched last night. First, Out of the Bottle. I decided that this story is not a Save the Cat genre out of the bottle because an essential ingredient of the out of the bottle genre is a hero touched by magic. Think of the story with Tom Hanks, Big, right? He makes a wish, he's touched by magic, and then he becomes big. That is not the case in this story. We start off with an immortal character, Death. He is not touched by magic. The other main character in this story is the youth, and he is not touched by magic. And so I decided this is not an out-of-the-bottle story. The other essential thing about an out-of-the-bottle story is the lesson learned. In an out-of-the-bottle story, the hero ultimately realizes that in order to solve their problem, they're going to have to do it without the magic. And so for those reasons, I did not feel like Death's Messenger was an out-of-the-bottle story. Now, the next genre that I looked at was the Rites of Passage. And this is the one that almost fooled me. I somewhat went to bed last night thinking, yep, I think it's a Rites of Passage. Now, if the story were a Rites of Passage, that would mean that the youth is the protagonist. That means that the whole section where the giant conquers death and he's lying on the road and wondering what will happen to the world, all of that is prologue. We don't even meet the character until the youth comes along. And so for that reason, I did not think that ultimately this story was a Rites of Passage. I slept on it because I thought, I'm not sure. But the essential ingredients of a Rites of Passage, right? We have a life problem, right? And our character, the youth, ultimately does have a life problem. He's encountered death, and he gets a terminal disease. And the lesson of the Rites of Passage story is that ultimately we have got to accept life. Life is not going to change. We just have to accept the hard truth. And this youth ultimately has to accept the fact that he's been aged up to a man really fast and he's got a terminal disease now. And ultimately he does accept that. But I don't think that this is a Rites of Passage story. Then I looked at The Monster in the House. A Brothers Grimm? Are you kidding me? It's gonna be a monster story, right? So, Monster in the House. Here's the essential ingredients of a monster in the house genre. A monster, a paranormal being who is evil at his core. If we think about death, he's basically out there to take your life. He is evil at the core. Then there has to be a house. Okay, now the house can be a town, right? So if you think of some stories, we have a ghost, but it's just in a particular town, and that is the house, right? But then you also have a sin. Somebody has unleashed the monster, right? And Frankenstein is a great example of this, right? In Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein makes the monster and abandons the monster, and part of the sin, an element of the sin, is that the monster is very targeted in his revenge, right? So he is essentially stalking he's essentially stalking the hero, right? So that's another key element, right? Who is the hero? So if the boy is the hero and this is a monster in the house, then death is stalking the boy, right? And ultimately, he is the one that unleashed this sin into the world. When he saved death, did he unleash a revenge, and that this monster would ultimately come back to get him? All right, so I was very tempted to say, is this a monster in the house? Because, come on, it's a Brothers Grimm. Of course it's a monster movie. But ultimately, I arrived at this decision. I think it is a superhero story. Mm-hmm. Yes. So here's the essential ingredients of a superhero story. A power. A superhero does not have to wonder if they are special. They know. And right out the gate, we meet Death, and there's no question in Death's mind that he is an immortal being and that he has very special powers, right? There is no even wavering in his faith about that. Boom, he is Death. He has no qualms about addressing and attacking a giant right out the gate, because that's what he does. He's Death. Doesn't matter who you are. Taking you. I spare no one. I'm Death. Now, second ingredient of a superhero story is a nemesis, right? A nemesis is typically of equal power, but they lack the faith, right? They're not like absolutely sure to their core that they are of equal power to the superhero, but they put up the facade, they're self-made, and they avoid the truth in themselves of knowing that they are essentially a false hero. They know that they are not as special as the superhero. And in the case of this story, the youth basically thinks that the compassion that he showed to Death is going to save the day. That Death, in fact, will spare his life, even though he saved him. He will spare his life because he showed compassion, so will Death. And that will override Death's decision to take his life. Okay? And then the last element of a superhero story is a curse. Now, if we think about Superman, right, we might think about kryptonite as his curse. But I actually think that the real curse of Superman is that he never feels comfortable having a family, right? He is always worried that because of who he is in the world, he can never keep his family safe, ultimately. And that is his curse. And that is what leads to his troubles with Lois Lane and his new family on Earth, etc. And in the case of Death's messenger, Death's curse is that he can spare no one. Even if he wanted to show compassion to this boy for saving his life, he can't. He's Death. He's gonna take everybody. Okay? So that is why I believe that Death's messenger is actually a superhero story. In the end of a superhero story, the lesson learned is that regardless of all these special powers, superheroes actually are still a lot like us. Yeah, they still have the same troubles and issues. And I think Death does actually struggle with this, and that's what makes this story interesting. I'm going to go into the middle of this story. After Death makes his promise, I think Death really struggles. That he gives the boy some extra time. But in the second half of second act, he has to start doing what he does. He can spare no one, right? That's his curse. And so he takes youth away from the boy. All of a sudden, the boy is aged up and a man. But that's not enough. Then he throws terminal disease at the boy. And the boy is miserable and he is sick, right? We break into 3 when the boy basically comes to the conclusion that Death has not sent him his messengers. He's not accepting his death, and Death has now decided, all right, he doesn't get it. It's time to do this the right way. And, there's sort of a gathering of the team. The boy regains his health. So Death gives him one last chance to enjoy life. This is Death showing some growth. He is showing some compassion, right? Instead of attacking the boy like he did with the giant, he's taking a breath, giving the boy, now a man, a little rally, right? He's taken his youth, he's given him terminal disease, but then it's time now. And he goes to execute the plan, and he taps on his shoulder and says, it's time. But then we have the Hightower surprise. The boy pushes back, just like the giant. Pushes back and says, wait a minute, you've broken your word. Why are you, you haven't sent any messengers. At least the boy doesn't believe so. So Death digs deep down. He could attack him. He could just take him. He could wipe him out right there. But he doesn't. And he explains, look, I sent all these symptoms. I made you sick. We're not every single one of those symptoms one of my messengers. And then he gets into the creepy idea of, it's not every night when you go to bed, my messenger. Ooh. Very Brothers Grimm. I like that little creepy, almost horror kind of element to the telling of the story. And then we see the execution of the new plan. The boy essentially surrenders and decides, you know what? You're right. You are Death. I cannot escape you, and you can spare no one. So I accept this. Yeah. And so the final image, right? We have the 2 bookends of the story, the opening image, and we see Death attacking to take somebody's life, right? Like he's very aggressive. But we see at the very end that in his own way, Death did show compassion, which is really remarkable given that he has the curse of having to take your life no matter who you are, right? And he ultimately has this conversation in advance, which is really unique. Death doesn't come and visit us. When it's time, and that's it, right? But in this case, he shows growth. He has this conversation. He keeps his word. And he doesn't have to, but he does. And the death is a very peaceful exit with Death. The boy walks away with Death. And for that reason, I think that Death is, he has the same struggles as we do. He wants to show this boy compassion, right? He in his own way, he did. And for that reason, I think that this is actually a superhero story. Had to sleep on it because I genuinely was thinking that this was the boy's story. But after a little bit of rest and a little bit more research, yeah, Death is the main character in this story. Now, I am just an amateur cat, no master, but what a lot of fun it was to dive into the genres, put the beats in different places. I mean, I had the beats in all different, prologue versus beating it out with the Death as the main character. Even my theme stated was different, right? What is the theme of this story? Was it accepting a hard truth, right? Was it, compassion will overcome? And in the end, the answer to that thematic question is no. I mean, yes, I have demonstrated compassion, but at the end, even I as Death, I've got to I've got to take your life, right? So is the story about compassion, or is the story essentially, I am death and I spare no one? And in the end, that is true, right? So I had a lot of fun breaking down this story. Look, it is the last week of Camp Nano. I've got a lot of word count left to go, and still it is now becoming part of my weekly writer's routine to break down a story. And you know what? I chose a short story, A Brothers Grimm. I read it to you right here. It's short, and it's really like cut to the bone, right? It's not like we have pages and pages to distill into the beats. It's like a sentence. Yeah. And so I encourage you, writers, to grab a short story or grab a long one, whatever you like, and break it down. It's going to help you to write faster. It's going to help you to write smarter. You spend less time in revision and getting your story finished, tight, out to query if it's a novel, into a competition if it's a screenplay, or to publisher, wherever it is that you're going to send that story once it's complete. Writers, I hope you enjoyed this. If you like this video, press like. It really supports the channel. If you want to be clued in on the next video, subscribe. And if you want a notification, ding, click the little bell. This was so much fun. I hope you'll come back and visit me for another sharpening of the axe. That's all for now. See ya on the next one.